In the United States, we use something called the Fahrenheit temperature scale. I've heard lots of silly stories about how that scale came into being. Let me tell you how it really happened. Daniel Fahrenheit was not a scientist at all. He was a Polish merchant who, during the 1700s, decided to train himself in the newly emerging craft of scientific instrument making. And being very clever, he saw a future in calibrated thermometers. He heard that a Danish astronomer named Olaus Roma knew how to do the job. And so he traveled to Denmark to see how Roma calibrated his thermometers. Now, Roma had invented a temperature scale of his own, which, like that of Celsius, was based on the freezing point and the boiling point of water. But the scale had a number of differences from Celsius. First of all, Roma based his scale on 0 to 60 degrees rather than 0 to 100. The 0 to 60 degrees probably had something to do with the degrees in a circle. The second difference was that Roma didn't like negative numbers, and so in order to avoid them, when he dipped his thermometer in freezing water, in water and ice, and made a mark on it, he didn't mark that as 0 degrees, but rather as 7.5 degrees, leaving 1/8 of his scale below that. Now, on the day that Fahrenheit came to watch Roma calibrate his thermometer, Roma was making thermometers to be used for meteorological purposes, for the weather. And if you're going to make a thermometer for meteorological purposes, it's not convenient to have one that reads from the freezing point of water to the boiling point of water, because the weather seldom gets this hot. And so what Roma did was to make one mark at the freezing point, and for the other mark, he measured human body temperature. And when he had found that mark, he called that 22.5 degrees. And that was the basic scale that Fahrenheit adopted. But Fahrenheit didn't like fractions. So when he made his own thermometers, he multiplied everything by 4. And now the scale was 30 degrees to 90 degrees from the freezing point to blood temperature. Then he made another change. He decided that it would be more convenient to have 64 degrees between these 2 points instead of 60. The reason is a good instrument maker's reason. He had to engrave single-degree marks on his thermometer. If it was 64 degrees between his 2 calibration points, then he would divide it in half and in half again and again 6 times, and he would have it down exactly to 1-degree markings. So he shifted his temperature scale once more to make it 32 degrees to 96, a difference of 64. Then using that thermometer, he measured the temperature of boiling water somewhat inaccurately, not very well, and he decided that it was 212 degrees. Later on, after he died, 212 degrees was defined to be the temperature of boiling water, and that shifted the temperature of the body a little bit. It's really 98.6 degrees. And that's how the Fahrenheit scale came into being. Now, you might ask, which of these temperature scales is the best one? That's a silly question. The Kelvin scale, or absolute scale, is the one that's used by scientists. The Celsius scale is almost ideal for cooking because it's based on the temperature of boiling water in an open pot. And the Fahrenheit scale, which has 0 to 100 degrees as the range of normal weather temperatures, is almost perfect if you want to talk about the weather.